Canada was her birthplace and as part of her identity, and we're quite sure she would have smiled wryly at being named a Giant of the North because she was a rather petite person. Margaret loved to draw. She was determined to make art her career at a time when very few women were welcome in the world of graphic design and illustration. In her home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, she built a beautiful light-filled studio that opened onto her garden. Always busy, she spent hours at her art table, illustrating a new book, reviewing the latest Harry edition, and working on multiple personal drawings and art projects. Long after her publishing life was over, Margaret continued creating. For years, she was part of a group of artists who gathered every week to practice life drawing. She volunteered at a local elementary school where she demonstrated to Harry-loving kids how to draw everyone's favorite dirty dog. And she was always sending illustrated notes, often droll and witty, to friends and family. Margaret made drawing her life's work, and it sustained her into her 90s. Thank you for honoring her work today. And now I'm going to read a little bit about Margaret Bloy Graham from my own perspective. Margaret Bloy Graham, born November 2nd, 1920, and died January 22nd, 2015. Children's book artist, winner of 2 Caldecott Awards in 1950 and 1953. My first awareness of Margaret Bloy Graham as an adult was back in the late 1980s. I was visiting Maurice Vellicoupe that day in his apartment, and he pulled a couple of her children's books off the shelf to show me. I've always looked up to and trusted Maurice Vellicoupe for his excellent taste, so I was curious to see what they were all about. One of the books was Harry the Dirty Dog, and the moment I saw it, I recognized it as a favorite childhood children's book, though I had probably not given it a single thought in the intervening years. Around this time, I was rather obsessed with the cartoonists of the old New Yorker magazine, and I saw in Bloy Graham's work the same exciting mid-century vibe, the clean lines, the modern shapes, the carefully organized backgrounds, and the broad, charming cartoon styles of the figures. That was the day I became a Margaret Bloy Graham fan, and I still am. It took me more than a few years to track down all of her books, and it was a goal pursued relentlessly, and I did it. And let me tell you, in those pre-internet days, you had to do some serious digging to find decades-old children's books. Now, I don't think children's books and comics are all that naturally related, beyond both being narrative and using words and pictures. For the most part, they operate very differently. However, some children's books artists are definitely cousins of cartoonists. There were quite a few of this type in the 40s to the 1960s. H.A. Ray, Curious George, Virginia Lee Burton, Mike and his Steam Shovel, something like that, and Adrian Adams, Bernard Weber, Maurice Sendak. You know, these people were all cartoonists. Margaret Bloy Graham is certainly among this group. Her books are laid out and they're told like a cartoonist would tell a story. Action follows action in a comic strip manner. Basically, her two-page spreads are just big panels. Personally, I think her best books were the ones she did with her husband, later her ex-husband, Gene Zion. The Harry the Dirty Dog books, Really Spring, The Plant Sitter, and my favorite of all her books, Dear Garbage Man. This utterly charming book follows a new garbage man on his first day at work, and with a typically 50s attitude, it instructs you that recycling is a big waste of time. At the conclusion of the book, all the stuff nobody wants any longer just ends up happily at the dump, which is probably why it's so hard to find old children's books. Anyway, somewhere during those years, when I discovered Bloy Graham, I also found out that she was a Canadian, and that made me like her even more. I also found out that the original art to Harry the Dirty Dog, her most most famous book has been donated. Does every subway car have to come to when I'm talking? It does. The artwork for Harry the Dirty Dog has been donated to the Osborne collection right here in Toronto at the Lillian H. Smith Library. And I'll tell you something. You can go there and you can look at the art. You can request to see it. I've done this several times, and let me tell you, you should go and see the art. It's beautiful, and you can learn a lot, like by looking at the originals of artists like this. You should go. Anyway, in 1995, I wrote Margaret a letter, wondering if she might like to be interviewed. She wrote back politely, suggesting that perhaps one day in the future we might meet for a cup of coffee. That seemed positive, but of course, I never heard from her ever again. Now that I am much older and have had many such letters written to me, I know that from answering these requests, that a possible cup of coffee in the future means I will never see you again in my life. So fair enough, Margaret. That's fine. I understand. Though I still regret the loss of that interview because there are precious few interviews of people like Margaret Bloy Graham writing or talking about their own life. But looking through my collection of books, I found one from a 1964 reference book titled More Junior Authors. Here's what she wrote with a slight edit. I was born in Toronto, Canada. When I was a year old, my family moved to Sandwich, Ontario. Sandwich was a very nice old town with lots of space to roam about in. It was on the Detroit River, which was a source of endless entertainment to my brother and me. I loved being taken to the theater in Detroit and to the Children's Museum there. Summer holidays were spent with my grandfather in England or with my aunt in the United States. As a child, reading meant more to me than drawing, and as I grew older, reading became my favorite pastime. When I was 10, we moved back to Toronto, where I went to the Saturday morning class at the art gallery. There, we were never told how to draw, but were encouraged to draw things as we felt them. While in high school, I went to art classes taught by a sympathetic and encouraging teacher, and as a result, my interest in sketching and painting grew. After high school, I went to the University of Toronto and majored in art history, with the vague idea of museum work or teaching as a career. I never considered that I might become an artist until one summer when I worked in the display department of a large store, which was probably Eden's. The artists working there were encouraged to paint freely and expressively. It was exciting to do big canvases, and for the first time I began to think of myself as a creative artist. After graduation, I came to New York City to take a summer course at the Art Students League. Later, I decided to stay in New York, if possible, but with no practical commercial experience, it was difficult to get started in the art world. I became a silkscreen apprentice, worked for a printer, and later worked in the art department of a fashion magazine. Finally, I began to do freelance work. I did illustrations for magazines such as Vogue, Glamour, Town & Country, House & Garden, and 17. In recent years, I've been concentrating on doing picture books. I find that children's book illustration gives me great freedom for creativity and offers exciting possibilities as an artist. Now, even though that reads essentially as just a career biography, you do get some flavor of her early life and the usual difficulties of a young artist starting out. In fact, as Margaret's niece suggests, I imagine those difficulties were somewhat tougher than usual, being a young woman in early 50s, male-centric New York publishing. It's not a total surprise that she gravitated towards children's books. It was one of the few welcoming havens for women writers and artists in that era. You can see her work really develop in those early books. Leaps and bounds, every single book. Exciting cartoon. Now, before I conclude, I'd like to linger on another favorite book of hers of mine, The Plant Sitter. This gorgeous book from 1959, written with Jean Zion, all moody greens and blues and yellows, is the story of a little boy who takes the job of a plant sitter, taking care of other people's plants while they are away. Bit by bit, to his mother and father's chagrin, he fills the whole house with plants. He takes good care of the plants, and they flourish, growing bigger and lusher by the day. the house grows cramped. In the middle of the book, the boy has a marvelous surrealistic dream where all the plants grow so dense that the very walls of the house burst off, leaving behind a perfectly plant-shaped house. A wonderful, crazy drawing. Beautiful. A real tour de force picture book and marvelously funny. The drawings are perfect, sweet, joyous, and like all her books, she uses a perfect limited palette of colors. Go find a copy. It can't be that difficult. Everything is easy nowadays. Just go to Abe Books or whatever the fuck it is and buy a copy of this book. Check out her work. That is the way an artist survives death. Go read her books and bring her back to life. Thank you.